So welcome back to Lou's Demos. Here we're going to talk about how to do the initial walkthrough of a Palo Alto from scratch. So by default it is admin and admin to log in, and then you should never save it unless it's a lab. And then it's going to prompt you for a new password here, and then you need to make something that is secure, as it will not accept the password. So let's see if it accepted the password. There we go. So it did accept my password. This must have been part of the last pass setup. So by default, this address is 192.168.1.1. So here's everything welcoming to your OS. So this is version 10. So here we can see here's the different additional information that has changed. So we can just check, don't show us again. So here, if we want to enable telemetry data to let them know, again, you could choose enable or disable. I'm just going to choose remind me later. So here we can see the management level, the CPU. Right now I don't have anything configured in here, so when we go under device, so some of the things we want to make sure that we have set up in our setup. Here we have our management, we have our operations. So here we can reboot, shut the device down, set up our custom logos, and set up our SNMP setup, and go back to our different configurations. So we can revert, save, load, export, import. Here we have our different services. So here again, we want to set up our time server, and what are we using for our proxy. So as an example for my DNS server, I'm just gonna add and then our network time. Again, I'm just gonna point to my router, to my time server. There we go. So we have our interface. So here on our management interface, you can see there's our default address. So we want to go ahead and change that. So I'm going to make my quick settings. And then hit OK. And then we're going to want to do is hit commit all changes. And then at the next step after that, we would want to do is log back, deploy this where we're going to hook it up to our network, or we're going to be rack mounted, so we can connect it to the management IP, since this will be updated soon in a second. And then we'd want to do is go and click on getting our license. Alright, so I'll see you guys in a moment because this is going to take a while to do. Now that we're back, rebooted the machine, I kind of moved it back to my home spot. So hopefully I put in all the right values this time. So we want to go to the next step is go to licensing under our device, towards all the way down to the bottom. Now, depending on how you received your device, so you may already have keys, or you might have activated this in the Palo Alto portal and put the keys in there. If you did it that way, or you manually would put the keys in there, depending. So, since this is a machine that's already been activated, I'm just going to click here, retrieve keys. So this is going to go to Palo Alto. This is why it's important to make sure you have your DNS settings correct, your default gateway. In here we can see here's all our licenses that popped up. Great. And then from there, the next step we want to do is go to dynamic updates and check now. So the Palo Alto has two sets of software. So it has the dynamic updates, or the different license keys that you've purchased. From there, you would download certain things depending on your license. And then from there, we'll go to software and start the software upgrade. And then pretty much we'll go from here. So now we can see we have our newest version of our software. So we're going to go to our apps and threats first and download that, because that's the most important one you need. Because sometimes if you're going to update your software, you need to have that done first. So I'm just going to close that out, let it go. It's just downloading, then it's the next step you have to install. So then we can go to our software. And again, we're going to go down to the bottom and check now to fetch. So this may take a moment because this is not a very fast firewall. So we're going to hit check now, and we're going to see our different versions. Again, this is at the time of the recording at the beginning of 2021. So maybe in the future when you see this video, there may be more things to look at, or newer, or the interface may look newer. But since pretty much the interface has relatively been the same, we have dashboard, ACC, monitor, things like that. So here we're at 10.2. I'm going to jump us into 10.03. So it's pretty easy to do. You're just gonna, well, we're gonna have to wait till it's finished downloading. So let's jump through a couple things to look at some of the default settings. So let's go to network, and we can see our two interfaces here are by default V-wired. So if you plug things into Ethernet 1, that would be your outside, and your Ethernet 2 would be your inside. So like an example, I'm going to have mine upload. My upload link will be from the 1, and then from my switch will come in here as 2. So right now I have not gotten the link lights on, maybe just because it's not fully up, or I have a problem with the network card. It's up in V-wire, so you can put this in line and start filtering things out. So the person who loaned me this firewall, and my experience right now with the 10.2, it's been kind of a mix, so I'm going to update that first. I just wanted to show you what everything looks like by default. So let's go to policies. Here we go. Let's wait for this to load up. So normally your policies, you have 2, but in here, some rules in here, but for some reason I'm not seeing any rules in here. So that's probably why my interface didn't light up. Because I had reset the box and I'm just looking down to check it out. But normally you would have 2 rules in here for it to work. So I'm not sure what's going on with that, but we'll look at that later. Alright, let's go back to our device. Let's go to our dynamic update and see if it's finished downloading. So down here, we should be able to see our task, and it still looks like it's loading, so we can see if it's already done downloading or not. Yeah, well, it looks like it finished completed, so all right. So here we can review the policy, the apps, or look at the release notes. I'm just going to go ahead and go and install, because normally you want to, before you do a patch, some patches do require to have your app ID at a certain level. So I just out of habit from when I was managing Palo Altos for a couple of years, knowing that I had to do that, and I would have to turn around and update this first. So I'm going to go ahead and update this. So again, you just hit the update, and then it's just going to run for a little bit, and then from there we're going to go. So you can see here we're doing the process. Now this is going to take all the way up to 100, and then from there we would start the software portion and then start doing that portion. All right, so that's pretty easy to do. All you're going to do is hit close, wait for that to finish, then this checkbox will be here set for currently installed. And then, so here's the good nice part about the dynamic update. You don't have to reboot the firewall. You could do any of these dynamic updates online, and then you can do the software portion of it, but you can download it. But once you hit commit, it'll require to reboot the firewall. All right, now that we're back, getting the Palo Alto updated and patched. Seems like it's been working pretty good for me. So again, let's just go through a couple of things that you may want to do to set up. So now, if we start looking through some of our different tabs, we should maybe start seeing some traffic flowing. There we go. So again, by default, let's go back there and take a look at it real quick. By default, our two interfaces are set in B-Wire. Now they're working. Had a little bit of weird anomalies with that earlier patch. Now that I patched it, it seems to be working fine. So again, let's look at what the options of an interface can be. So we can set up the interface to be either TAP, HA. So TAP is another good starting point if you want to get a bird's eye view of your network. I'll bounce back to that in a moment, but I just want to show the basic things here. So here again we have our zones, and let's just take a quick peek of it. And here we can see we have a couple different things we can set up in here. So we can have some ACLs, we can have some device ACL IDs, again exclusion list, zone profile. So we can set one up if we had one set. Here I just want to show one of the little checkboxes here. So enable user identification. So you'd have to have the additional software. You'd have to be running Active Directory, and then you can check those boxes. All right, so the next thing by default, well, as far as your addresses, your address groups, that's all going to be blank because you haven't done anything yet. So this is something relatively new, is dynamic user groups. So this is new from the last version I played with 7, so maybe we'll take a deep dive in that later. And again, back to objects real quick. So here's some of our different security profiles. So here you can see that we have a default security policy. Here we can see here's some basic things it's going to provide. And again, these functionalities are going to work based on the licensing you have. So here we have some antivirus. Again, we have a default and a strict. We can make our own custom by just clicking add. And then we have our intrusion or our vulnerability protection, basically our intrusion protection type system. Here we have again a default and a strict. Here you can see the different types of rule categories that they're going to fall into, what levels of threats. So any, like you can make one for a particular threat, and you can say critical levels, and then you can say what is it going to do by default. And one of the cool things with the Palo Alto, you can enable to capture the packet. So if this rule is triggered, you can have the packet. So it's a PCAP. You can download it, look at it in Wireshark, or looking into other tools too. So that's kind of nice. That's been around for a while. Now it's just kind of a little bit more open, I think. And then we have the URL. So here's our default URL. Let's take a quick peek of it. So here is all of our different categories. So this is set up for default, like a corporation. So like they wouldn't want any adult type stuff going on. And again, you can change these things. So one of the things I want to just show here, let's see, allow, Oh, and then here's the URL checker. So if you have a particular URL and you want to know what category it falls into, you can put it right in here, click on not a bot, and it'll tell you, and then you can submit it for a different category too. Nice function. That's a nice feature. Here again, we have a little bit more additional settings. We can detect user credentials, inspect HTTP header inspections. So again, we can well, I guess in the, oh, it's in read only, that's why. So that's why you can't do that. So let's just say we're making a new one, and now we can click on this. So one of the things I want to point out here, so this is some really cool features here. So you can set up, if you say allow, it doesn't log it, but if you do alert, it'll allow it, but it'll log it. So you may want to track where people are going. You want to choose alert, so it'll generate a log. Always allow does not pass that information in the logs. And continue is a nice feature, so you can say, you know what, this is kind of questionable, but yes, you're sure you still want to go there, click continue. This is another good feature too. This would be like override. So what this means, if you have like your help desk team, you would give them a code, and then they need to go to a particular website that they need particular access. It'll prompt them for a code, and they can put it in there and continue on with that code. So that is a nice feature that you can do with the URL filtering. File block. Again, this is some basic stuff, so you can block files from being downloaded depending on the type of category of files, how they're getting it. So like here we're blocking from high risk file types for many applications, going either direction. So these are some of the different files that we want to download, or stop people from downloading. So that's kind of nice. Again, you have basics, restrict, and again you can make your own, again just clicking add and walking through the steps. And then again, like file block, you don't need licensing, you just need the standard license. Wildfire, you need a license for that. Data filtering, you don't need licensing for the additional licensing. This is here we're going to add, and we're going to add what type of data pattern set we want to look for. So like an example, we can click new, create a data pattern, and then we can literally create something, like file types. So if we wanted to look for like a document that had like social security numbers, things like that, we can, block that stuff. And then we have DOS protection. Again, not much set up there, so you'd have to configure that. And let's jump to our policies. So we don't have any net configured, so let's look at our security policy. So by default, you got one rule allowing your trusted and untrusted zones to go through. And here you can see how many hit counts. When was this? From the date. These down here, depending on the version of Palo Alto, they've always been there, they've just been marked hidden. That's why they're orange. And here, if we click on the rules, again, we have source. So what zone or interfaces, what source IP if we wanted to narrow it down, or even a username, source device, depending on what type of device it is. So, we can get pretty granular. So we can say any zone from a, any PC, no hips, select. So we can do a lot of different things here, which is kind of neat. So we can go here, and then we can make a new profile for a device. And so we can say like version, like Android or whatever, Windows, I guess. Yeah, I guess there's a bunch. So again, I didn't really play with this because this is really relatively new from the last time I've used the Palo Alto. I've used it in version 7, 8. So those are the basic things, and then from there, once you have your traffic plugged in, you can now start seeing at least your basic traffic flowing through. And let's look here and see if we see any threats or anything like that. URL filtering. And the reason we don't see any of these, we have to jump back to our policy, because by default, none of that stuff is enabled. So you have to go to your rule when you go to actions, profile settings, and then here it doesn't have a group, so we'll just go in here, or it doesn't have a group by default, so we're going to pick profiles. So then you would just use the default ones in here. So like an example, if we just use the default one in here, and again apply our changes, and you can see here now it shows this little icon here. So as you turn those different profiles on, they'll show up in here. So we're going to hit commit and continue, and then in a couple of minutes, once that's done, we will be able to then go into monitor and see URL, user ID. Again, a lot of these functionality you have to, out of the box, it's not set up for all this information. You have to enable those things. And it's also depending on the license keys you have, because if you don't have the threat protection, you're not going to see threat. If you don't have URL, you're not going to get URL filtering. So that's why these are, that rule by default's off, because you may not have any of those features or functionality configured. So, and again, once you do, you want to do is, once you've at least done the app, you want to go back into your dynamic updates and also update all your other stuff. So like an example, I don't have the antivirus done, so you want to update all these before you start changing the rules. So like the URL is already done, but you want to go in here and update all these other functionalities, so those functionalities will start working out of the box. So that's part of the reason why you don't see all that additional information in monitoring, because you may or may not have all those different licenses, so it's not going to, they're not going to be checked off the box. So again, that's kind of the basic settings that I wanted to kind of just go through and show through this video. All right, I will see you guys later. Bye.